I want to bring in Lester Munson. He's with the Washington consulting firm BGR Group. Lester, I want to start with Trump there. How do you think he'll be received at this year's NATO?
Well, I think per the usual, he'll be received with a lot of drama. There'll be some people who complain. There'll be some protests. And meanwhile, there'll be other heads of state and heads of government who are looking to win his favor for various reasons. So it'll be good television.
Russia, no fan of NATO. That's been consistent for years. It says that the group is encroaching on its sphere of influence, its historical spheres of influence. Is there truth to that? And do you think its growing concerns are justified?
Well, I think Russia wants to say things that are going to be provocative to the NATO audience and try to divide the various heads of state during this meetings. But I don't think that's really true. NATO, there is a little bit of a kind of a crisis of purpose in NATO, not a huge one, but a little bit of one, and there's definitely some conversations going on. I think Russia's trying to play into that.
And we heard Jens Stoltenberg there trying to clarify that crisis of identity. He said NATO's enemy isn't Russia or even China, as some have suggested, it's terrorism. What do you think he means by that?
Well, I think terrorism is certainly one of the challenges. I do think the possible peer competition from China is also a real concern of NATO countries. I know it is in the United States. And I think generally Russian aggression abroad and Russian interference in some of its neighboring countries is of concern to NATO. So I think it's all three, actually.
We had a rather odd scenario recently with the Turkish incursion into northern Syria. Admittedly, the road paved for them by Donald Trump there. But then Trump also threatened Ankara if it oversteps. So you had the situation of possibly escalation between two NATO members. What happens in that kind of scenario?
Well, it's almost as if the policy was not very well thought out or planned, in fact. So it is a problem. The question of Turkey has been an issue for NATO and for Europe for quite some time in different ways. I think we're looking at, we need to have real discussions between the US and other NATO parties about the relationship to Turkey and how to handle Turkey's actions in the Middle East, many of which are not very helpful to NATO.
30 years after the Cold War, does NATO as a bloc, do you think, does it have a future?
Oh, I think it very much has a future. It is the preeminent military alliance of liberal democracies. I think it will continue to be so. These discussions are important, and the alliance is now celebrating its 70th year. That's an amazing feat. I think they've got a lot of years ahead of them.
Donald Trump has made a lot out of funding NATO. We heard earlier this week that Germany will boost its funding to match the US's. Do you expect more of that in the coming years?
Yeah, and I give President Trump some credit for bringing up the issue of how much NATO allies spend on their defense. There is a 2% threshold of gross domestic product for each NATO member to spend on defense. Only 8 or so countries are living up to that right now. It's important that others step up and do their part, and he's, been willing to say so.
Is there talk of NATO expansion? Will that be discussed at this year's summit?
That has not been a hot topic recently. I don't think it's going to come up this time.
All right, Lester Munson, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.